About 2 weeks ago on Twitter, one of the people who I follow issued a very interesting challenge which had to do with documents and with the Wombo AI art generator. And the suggestion was that we should take our theses and dissertations titles, whether at the PhD or master's or bachelor's level, and input those as prompts to see what kind of imagery Wombo would come up with. So I decided to do that with, I actually have all three, a bachelor's honors thesis, a master's thesis, and a PhD dissertation. The PhD dissertation title was a little bit too long to use as a prompt, but my bachelor's worked just fine, and it's a document that I no longer have. I'm sure it's stored somewhere at Lakeland University, and it was called Truth Self-Referential Isomorphic Statement Groups. And you might say, well, what the hell is that about? Well, so I was very much into the intersections between philosophy and mathematics and logic at the time. And, you know, the notion of using mathematics to represent things was, you know, kind of a cool idea I was playing around with. And when you've got isomorphisms, things are connected with each other in interesting ways where there's a mapping function going on. And truth self-referential means that you have a statement that either refers to its own truth or is part of a set of statements that are all connected together that in some way refer to each other's truth. So the liar's paradox is a prime example, and as a matter of fact played an important role in that. The liar's paradox is very simple. You can do it in several different ways. One is for me to say, I am lying to you right now, right? If it's true, then I'm lying to you, so then it's false. But if it's false, then it means I'm not lying to you, so I'm telling the truth. You see where this is going. And so I was playing around with a lot of these sorts of things. And I don't need to go through what the thesis was about. Instead, I'm much more interested in what this was about. So isomorphic truth self-referential statement groups, right? A nice title. What does Wombo generate? You see some of the images there behind me, and we're going to look at all of the images that it generated in just a bit. People get very preoccupied, I'll say as a last thing, about, is this art or not? Or who's the artist? And I don't really care about that sort of stuff, frankly, myself. That's issues for other people who are much more concerned about that. I'm really interested in what kind of cool imagery does this generate. So I'm going to take you on a little trip through what this title, Isomorphic Truth Self-Referential Statement Groups, provides us with, and let's see what it looks like. Here is the first image that was generated using that prompt from my bachelor's honors thesis, and I like this one quite a bit. It looks almost like a cloud city, but when we start looking at it from going from the top to the bottom, we see some cool and interesting features. First of all, there's a person in the landscape at the top, and then as we scroll down, we see something like houses and buildings stacked on top of each other, and it goes all the way down to a base. It's not just hanging there in the clouds. When we turn to the next one, again, we see very architectural features to this, but now there's a clear, explicit addition of human beings, one of the artistic themes that is going to run through quite a few of these. So if we begin at the top, we see this beautiful, city sort of built up out of other bits and pieces hanging up in the sky, and then we scroll our way down and we see human-like figures. None of them are particularly great people constructions, and some of them are a bit grotesque, but you can identify them as people, and they're there in the middle of the city, perhaps looking up at it. If we look at them very closely, you can see that, what we've got here does look like it has faces in some places or hands, but it's rather grotesque, and some of them blend in a bit at points with the city itself. Now, in the next one, we have a very different kind of motif, one that just has patterns that are redolent of writing perhaps, or some sort of script, and where they're all bunched up on top of each other. If we scroll down through this, we see that there's no writing anywhere in it, but there's writing-like things, and some of them are nested inside of each other. Very colorful, very cool, I think. This is another one that's quite similar, but it's not quite so colorful. It's much more muted. And if we look at this one, we'll go from the bottom to the top. Same sort of deal. We're not seeing an actual script. We're seeing something that imitates it or apes it, and maybe could be interpreted as, if we zoom in and we look at this non-writing, this interesting calligraphy or cuneiform or pictograms, there's no actual information there, is there? There's only the hint of it. Going on again, we managed to combine both of these themes in this one, which is actually my favorite of all of the ones generated for isomorphic truth self-referential statement groups. And if we zoom in on it, once again, this luminous, beautiful semi-writing is not quite writing as such, but it's worth checking out. And then we have the people down here. It seems to be that the theme is putting together a number of robed people who maybe are conferring about these matters. And we can like scroll from them up into this writing. And it's almost as if it's, you know, a monolith hanging over them that they're interpreting. Of course, that's very subjective on my part. Here we have something that almost looks more like a library at first. And from the outset, we're looking at it and it looks like there's humanoid figures involved with maybe books or writing behind them, and then, a basis of a book. But if we start at the top and we work our way downward, maybe this isn't actually human beings. Maybe this is just garments or even like skin suits that have been thrown together. As we go down further, we get something that could be a human being seated. We also get something that looks suspiciously like a chicken. And then we have this bottom part, which almost looks like a book itself turned on its side. Then we get a really trippy one, and this is another one that I particularly like, where we combine the humanoid figure with the potential writing. If we start at the top, we have this, really trippy kind of background that is less linear, more circular now, and we go down to these figures who now look more owl-like than human, perhaps, or avian at least, all the way down to the things that they are surrounded by or surrounding, and those are kind of cool. If we zoom in on it, we can see like here's a figure with that, what do we want to call it, like wall of writing or symbols. So that's an interesting one. Here's another really interesting one. This one, it's more like a composite of a giant figure with a head, whose head is composed of many other things. It is, I think, the steampunk one, and there's a lot of other stuff going on in this one. If we begin at the bottom, we see something that could be a little ship, perhaps, some mountains, and it leads upward into the figure, who is composed of all sorts of deformities and monstrosities tied together. If we look at it more closely, there's faces within it as well. And then it fades off into the background. Here's one as well that also has a large figure and something that looks like a face. If we begin at the bottom, we have what appear to be more architectural features and, again, massive shoulders leading up into something that's clearly a face. There's eyes and a nose to it. And then the helmet or headdress or hair is composed of all sorts of other stuff as well. This is a really interesting one, and I believe this was the pastel. Here we have just a single figure, or what appears to be a figure, because, well, there's two things to say. So we'll come back to the figure in a moment. Look at the ground. The ground is more circular or ovaloid, but it also does have that same appearance of like conveying information or script, but now it's the land itself. Now, if we zoom in on the figure and we get closer and closer, it looks, on the one hand, less and less like a human being, more and more as if it's just part of the landscape. And we get to see that the landscape itself does look quite a bit different than some of the other ones that we've seen. Here's the last one. This is another favorite of mine, in part because of the celestial imagery of it. It's quite beautiful. And if we start at the bottom, we have some human figures. We have some painterly stuff that I myself would love to be able to do. We go up through this curve, and we have a number of other seemingly humanoid figures in various stances. And then we have the luminous heavens themselves. Again, very brushworky, quite beautiful. So those are the ones that are generated by using this prompt that derives from the title of my senior thesis, Isomorphic Truth Self-Referential Statement Groups. And we'll do more of these in the future with my master's thesis and my dissertation and see what comes out of those.